Jasmine Washington, a 12-year-old black honor student, sits shivering on United Airlines Flight 2467, tears streaming down her face after being publicly denied a blanket while white passengers received them. Flight attendant Tiffany Reynolds sneers, "These aren't for everyone," loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Captain Kyle Bennett receives an urgent call from airline headquarters as they're preparing for landing. The caller identifies himself as Malcolm Washington, head of global operations for United Airlines, and Jasmine's father. Before we dive deeper into this shocking incident, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their skin color, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to follow Jasmine's incredible journey from humiliation to justice. The next part of this story will show you how a brilliant young scientist's dream trip turned into a nightmare, and why her father's position makes this case unlike any other discrimination incident you've heard before. 2 weeks before the blanket incident, Jasmine Washington stood trembling with excitement on the stage of the National Youth Science Competition in Atlanta. The judges had just announced her climate research project as the grand prize winner among thousands of entries from across America. Her innovative approach to measuring carbon capture in urban green spaces had impressed the panel of renowned scientists. "Your work shows exceptional promise," Dr. Harlow, the lead judge, told her as she accepted the gleaming trophy. "That's why we're selecting you to represent young American scientists at the International Youth Climate Conference in Boston next month." For Jasmine, this was the culmination of years of dedication. Growing up in Chicago's South Side, she'd fallen in love with environmental science after a school field trip to a local urban farm. While other kids played video games, Jasmine spent weekends collecting soil samples and analyzing data. Her bedroom walls showcased scientific posters instead of pop stars. Malcolm Washington, Jasmine's father and a single parent since his wife died from cancer 4 years earlier, had always encouraged his daughter's scientific pursuits. As head of global operations for United Airlines, Malcolm often worked long hours and traveled frequently, but he never missed Jasmine's science fairs or academic ceremonies. "I'm so proud of you, Jazz," Malcolm said, hugging her tight after the competition. "Your mother would have been amazed by what you've accomplished." The timing of the Boston conference, however, created a significant challenge. Malcolm was overseeing a critical merger integration that required his presence at headquarters. After much discussion, they decided Jasmine would make the trip alone, her first solo flight. "I can handle it, Dad," Jasmine assured him, though her voice betrayed a hint of anxiety. Malcolm nodded. "I know you can. I'll arrange everything to make it as smooth as possible, and I'll fly out to join you 2 days later for your presentation." Despite her confident words, Jasmine had reason to be nervous. Previous family trips had exposed her to uncomfortable stares and subtle discrimination. Once, at a resort in Florida, a staff member had repeatedly asked to see her room key, while ignoring white guests entering the same area. Another time, a flight attendant had questioned whether she belonged in the premium cabin, despite her boarding pass clearly showing her assignment. Carol Bailey, a retired teacher and family friend, volunteered to accompany Jasmine to Chicago O'Hare International Airport. The morning of the flight, Jasmine double-checked her presentation materials and packed her lucky microscope keychain. "Remember everything we discussed," Malcolm told her during their goodbye at home. "You're representing young scientists everywhere, but most importantly, you're representing yourself. Stand tall." "I will, Dad," she promised, memorizing his advice. At the airport, Carol noticed flight attendant Tiffany Reynolds giving them strange looks during check-in. When the agent announced Jasmine had been upgraded to first class, Tiffany's expression soured noticeably. "That's a pleasant surprise," Carol said, unaware that Malcolm had secretly arranged the upgrade as a special treat for his daughter. Before Jasmine headed to security, Carol pulled her aside for some final advice. "Keep to yourself, be polite, and remember that as a young black girl traveling alone, some people may treat you differently. Don't give anyone a reason to complain about your behavior." Jasmine nodded solemnly, familiar with these warnings that were a necessary part of her upbringing. She hugged Carol goodbye, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the security checkpoint with her boarding pass clutched tightly in hand, excitement and nervousness battling within her. Jasmine approached the first-class boarding lane with her ticket and passport in hand. Despite her careful preparation and the confidence Malcolm had instilled in her, she felt a flutter of anxiety as other passengers, all adults, most of them white business travelers, glanced at her with varying degrees of curiosity and surprise. Flight attendant Tiffany Reynolds stood at the entrance to the jet bridge, checking boarding passes. When Jasmine presented hers, Tiffany's eyebrows shot up. "First class?" she asked, making no effort to hide her skepticism. She examined Jasmine's boarding pass with unusual scrutiny, turning it over and holding it up to the light as if checking for counterfeiting. "Are you sure you're at the right gate?" "Yes, ma'am," Jasmine replied politely, just as her father had taught her. Tiffany looked from the boarding pass to Jasmine and back again. "And this is definitely your boarding pass? Not your parents'?" A white businessman in line behind Jasmine cleared his throat loudly. "The line's backing up," he said, checking his watch. "The kid has a first-class ticket. What's the problem?" Tiffany flashed him a customer service smile completely different from her expression toward Jasmine. "Just doing my job, sir. Making sure everyone's in the right place." She reluctantly handed the boarding pass back to Jasmine. "Go ahead." The businessman, Troy Dixon, gave Jasmine a reassuring nod as she proceeded down the jet bridge. Tiffany's face hardened again as she turned back to Troy. Aboard the aircraft, Senior Flight Attendant Brandon Morris was greeting passengers at the door. He smiled at Jasmine, but his expression faltered when Tiffany caught his eye from the jet bridge and gave a barely perceptible head shake. "Seat 3A is on your right," Brandon told Jasmine, his initial warmth noticeably cooled. Jasmine found her window seat and stored her backpack under the seat in front of her. She watched as other first-class passengers boarded, all receiving warm welcomes from the crew. Several glanced at her with surprise, but most returned to their phones or magazines after the initial curiosity. Troy Dixon took the aisle seat next to her. "First time flying first class?" he asked kindly. "Yes, sir," Jasmine answered. "I'm going to a science conference in Boston." "Really? That sounds impressive." Their conversation was interrupted when Tiffany appeared beside their row. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" she asked Jasmine, ignoring Troy completely. Jasmine dutifully retrieved it from her pocket and handed it over. Tiffany studied it again, lips pursed. "Is there a problem?" Troy asked, his voice carrying an edge. "Just double-checking," Tiffany said, reluctantly returning the boarding pass. "We sometimes have passengers who get confused about their seating assignments." As she walked away, Troy muttered, "Third check for the same boarding pass. Interesting coincidence." Jasmine settled into her seat, determined to enjoy the experience despite the uncomfortable start. She was dismayed to discover that the air vent above her seat was blasting freezing air directly onto her face and arms. She tried adjusting it, but the vent seemed stuck at full blast. When Brandon came by offering pre-departure beverages, Jasmine politely asked, "Excuse me, could you help me adjust this air vent? I can't seem to turn it down." Brandon glanced at the vent, then at her. "They're automatic. Climate-controlled. Nothing I can do." He moved on to the next row without offering any assistance. 15 minutes later, Jasmine noticed him helping an elderly white woman adjust the exact same type of vent in the row ahead. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the cabin temperature seemed unusually cold. Jasmine wasn't the only one noticing, several passengers were putting on jackets or sweaters. The difference was that most other travelers had come prepared for the notoriously chilly airplane cabins. Jasmine, on her first business trip, hadn't known to bring a sweater aboard. She tried burying herself in her conference preparation, reviewing her presentation notes and research data, but the cold made it difficult to concentrate. Goosebumps had formed on her arms, and she found herself hunching her shoulders against the constant stream of cold air. When Tiffany passed by their row, Troy spoke up. "Excuse me, could you adjust the temperature? It's freezing in here." "The temperature is standard," Tiffany replied dismissively. "Perhaps you should have brought appropriate clothing." Her eyes flicked briefly to Jasmine. Throughout the meal service, Jasmine noticed the stark difference in how Tiffany treated her versus other passengers. White travelers received warm smiles and attentive service, while Jasmine's requests were met with curt responses or complete ignorance. When she asked for a refill of water, Tiffany pretended not to hear, though she immediately responded to similar requests from passengers across the aisle. Brandon observed these interactions with visible discomfort but made no move to intervene. Once, he made eye contact with Jasmine as Tiffany walked away after ignoring another of her polite requests, but he quickly looked away, busying himself with paperwork at the galley. During a moment of turbulence when Tiffany was in the back of the cabin, Jasmine pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to her father, "Flight really cold. Forgot jacket. Otherwise okay." She downplayed the situation, not wanting to worry him or sound like she was complaining. Jasmine was used to handling difficult situations on her own, especially when her father was busy with work. Troy's expression grew increasingly stormy as he witnessed Jasmine's treatment. "This is ridiculous," he muttered after Tiffany bypassed Jasmine during a snack service. "I've flown this airline hundreds of times, and I've never seen service this poor, or this biased." Jasmine just shook her head slightly, not wanting to draw more attention or create conflict. She'd been raised to keep her head down and not make waves, especially in situations where, as her father often sadly explained, people had already made up their minds about her based solely on the color of her skin. As evening deepened into night, the Boston-bound flight continued its journey across the darkened landscape below. The cabin lights dimmed after the meal service was completed, signaling to passengers that it was time to rest. Many travelers reclined their seats and closed their eyes, preparing to catch some sleep before landing. The temperature in the cabin had not improved. If anything, it seemed to have dropped further as the night progressed. Jasmine sat huddled in her seat, arms wrapped tightly around herself in a futile attempt to generate warmth. The persistent cold air blowing directly on her made concentration impossible, and she'd given up trying to review her conference notes. Tiffany emerged from the galley pushing a cart loaded with blankets and pillows. The soft, blue United Airlines blankets were neatly folded in stacks, along with white pillows in plastic wrapping. First-class passengers perked up at the sight, eager for the additional comfort. Row by row, Tiffany distributed the bedding with a practiced smile, to everyone except Jasmine. She handed pillows and blankets to passengers in 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, then deliberately skipped over 3A where Jasmine sat, moving directly to Troy in 3B, then continuing to rows 4 and beyond. Troy immediately noticed the omission. He watched as Tiffany gave the last visible blanket to the passenger seated directly behind Jasmine, then began to fold up her cart. Jasmine, who had been watching the distribution with growing hope, finally spoke up in a small, polite voice, "Excuse me, could I please have a blanket too? I'm really cold." The cabin fell momentarily quiet, as several nearby passengers looked up, apparently noticing for the first time that the young black girl had been skipped. Tiffany turned slowly, her customer service smile nowhere in evidence. In a voice loud enough to be heard several rows away, she stated coldly, "These aren't for everyone." The blunt declaration hung in the air. An older woman across the aisle gasped audibly. Jasmine's cheeks burned with humiliation as she shrank back into her seat, trying to become invisible. Troy Dixon was not so easily silenced. "What do you mean, not for everyone?" he demanded, unbuckling his seatbelt and standing up. "You just gave blankets to literally every other passenger in first class." Tiffany's expression hardened. "Sir, please remain seated while the seatbelt sign is illuminated." "I'll sit down when you explain why this child isn't getting a blanket when everyone else did," Troy countered, though he did lower himself back into his seat. Brandon Morris, who had been observing from the galley, finally approached. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice professionally neutral. "Yes, there's a problem," Troy said before Tiffany could respond. "Your colleague here just deliberately skipped giving a blanket to this young girl, then told her they aren't for everyone. I want to know what United Airlines policy is on blanket distribution, because it seems suspiciously like racial discrimination from where I'm sitting." Several passengers murmured in agreement. Brandon looked uncomfortable but quickly composed himself. "I apologize for any misunderstanding. We have limited supplies on board, and, that's not true, interrupted the elderly white woman across the aisle. I fly this route twice a month, and there are always more than enough blankets for first class. Always. Brandon's professional demeanor faltered momentarily. Tiffany cut in, we're following standard procedures for this flight. If you continue to be disruptive, sir, I'll have to report this incident to the captain. Jasmine, mortified by the attention and conflict she had inadvertently caused, spoke up in a quiet voice. It's okay. I don't need a blanket. Please don't worry about it. The elderly woman, Edith Hamilton, wouldn't let it go.